Hey, Scootaloo, wanna go get some ice cream from Sugar Cube Corner in town? Apple Bloom looked over to her lowered friend. She smiled with a great mischievous look surrounding her face. Well, don't you think we should ask Applejack first? Scootaloo looked up with large eyes. She didn't really want to break Fluttershy's rules by going off without consent. She at least wanted to go to Sweet Apple Acres first to let Applejack know where they were going, but she also didn't want to disappoint Apple Bloom by saying no. It's just over there. It would be too much walking if we went all the way home and then came all the way back to town, don't y'all think? Apple Bloom let her large innocent eyes get the best of her seated friend. You're right, Scootaloo smiled, and then they changed their direction. It didn't take them long before they arrived at the doorstep of the sweet shop. The sky was turning a bright orange, and they could see that the sun was starting to set. We best hurry before it gets too dark. Apple Bloom opened the door and then let herself in. Scootaloo allowed Apple Bloom to pull her wheelchair up the small steps. After her short struggle, the two went over to the friendly face that they recognized instantly. Hey there, little ones! How are you? How's Fluttershy, Rainbow, Applejack? Maybe I should call them. I haven't spoken to Rainbow Dash in a long time. I wonder what she's doing right now. Do you know what she's doing right now? Pinkie Pie leaned over the counter and let her face practically make contact with Scootaloo's forehead. Scootaloo wheeled herself back a few inches and watched as Pinkie Pie almost lost her balance. However, the hyper girl bounced back up on her feet and smiled at the children. What can I get for you guys, by the way? Pinkie's mouth was open wide as she patiently waited for the response. Her hands were positioned as if she were holding a pad and pen to write down their orders, but nothing but air was in her grasp. 2 ice creams! Apple Bloom held out 2 tiny fingers and shoved them towards Pinkie's face. The overly excited girl pretended to write down on her imaginary pad and her imaginary pen. She looked up with her large eyes and then threw her hands in the children's direction. Scootaloo and Apple Bloom jumped at Pinkie's sudden movements, but of course she had nothing to throw at them, so nothing was there to hit them. I bet you thought I was going to throw something at you! But you were wrong, because I wasn't really holding anything after all! Only write down orders when they're really big and complicated, but I can remember orders like yours! So I'll go get 3 cupcakes for you! Pinkie turned around to retrieve an order that they didn't give. No! Ice cream! 2 ice creams! Apple Bloom leaned over the counter and yelled to the oblivious Pinkie, who was already in the kitchen, probably getting the wrong thing for them. Apple Bloom released herself from the counter and stood back on the flat floor. Scootaloo couldn't help but see the humor that was happening before her. A few small giggles released themselves from her mouth, and she tried to cover it before she busted out into a fit. But as she heard Apple Bloom begin to laugh out as well, she couldn't help but join in on the laughter that Pinkie's comedic self had given them. Rainbow kissed over Fluttershy's neck softly. Small moans came from her lover's sweet lips, and Rainbow made her way back up to Fluttershy's mouth. She placed more kisses upon her lips as she began to pull down the straps of Fluttershy's dress. Rainbow released herself from Fluttershy's lock long enough to pull down Fluttershy's sundress completely. She saw that her lover was blushing with lust now, and she took this to her advantage. She let her hands work their way over Fluttershy's soft, sensitive body, causing loving noises to escape Fluttershy. Rainbow began to pull her own shirt off, revealing her smaller chest to Fluttershy, who looked up from underneath her with happiness. The athlete pulled off her sports bra, and then unstrapped Fluttershy's girlish pink bra. She slipped it off slowly from Fluttershy's body, and finally, she could see her lover's beautiful breasts. She couldn't help herself but stare at them for a few moments. They were so large, and Rainbow couldn't help but want them. She wanted every part of Fluttershy. Rainbow lowered herself from over top of the small girl, and she began to kiss upon her large bust. Fluttershy's head pulled back in pleasure as she felt Rainbow's lips and tongue move across her body. Fluttershy began to work her own magic as she reached down for Rainbow's smaller chest, and she began to massage them in her hands. Rainbow's face grew hot as she felt the touch of Fluttershy against her. Rainbow and Fluttershy didn't usually have sex, but every time they did, it felt like the first time. The tan rainbow-haired girl let her one hand slip between Fluttershy's thighs. She softly touched her, teasing her special place as she moved closer towards it, but never touched it. Fluttershy whimpered slightly as she lusted for Rainbow to touch her. She was waiting for Rainbow to move into her body. She wanted to feel every bit of Rainbow too. Rainbow could sense Fluttershy's plea, and she let her hand go across her panties. It was so hot down there with the slightest touch, and she could feel that it was beginning to become moist as well. Rainbow let herself smile as she continued to kiss Fluttershy's breast. "Are you ready?" Rainbow looked over to her lover. "Yes, please." Fluttershy smiled with happiness back at her. She braced her body for Rainbow's beautiful impact that was soon to come over her. Sure enough, Rainbow began to slowly slide her chest against Fluttershy's body all the way to Fluttershy's pink panties. She could smell Fluttershy's lovely scent, and once she felt ready, she began to pull down Fluttershy's underwear. She pulled them down her legs, and once they were off, she sent them soaring behind her. Rainbow focused on Fluttershy's love spot. She could see that it was yearning for her to touch it. It glistened with its wetness, and Rainbow reached out to it with one finger. Fluttershy squeaked at the single touch, and Rainbow was satisfied with this. She began to move closer to Fluttershy, and finally she moved her tongue inside against her lover's special place. She began to kiss at Fluttershy's other lips, and she began to taste her sweet juices inside of her mouth. With her free hand, Fluttershy began to rub Fluttershy on her most sensitive place of all, and she continued to let her tongue move in and out of her. Fluttershy cried out in sensational pleasure, and she began to thrust her hips forward, making the feeling much more intense. Rainbow continued what she was doing, thinking that she was doing it right, and listened for Fluttershy's moans of enjoyment. Rainbow could even feel herself boiling up under herself, and she wanted Fluttershy to do the same thing to her, but most importantly, she wanted Fluttershy to feel good. Rainbow could feel herself climaxing. Fluttershy could feel herself climaxing as Rainbow continued to make love to her. Her back arched upward as she leaned against her forearms. She began to squeak several times, and her moans began to get louder. With a few more licks and kisses by Rainbow, Fluttershy's body released itself, and she sent out her beautiful orgasm. Rainbow looked up from Fluttershy's place and smiled at her panting lover. She moved herself up across her body again and began to kiss her passionately. Fluttershy brought her hands to Rainbow's face and returned the kisses. Rainbow lay there on top of Fluttershy for a few more moments until Fluttershy released from her lip lock from Rainbow Dash. Fluttershy began to sit up, and Rainbow did likewise. Fluttershy parted her legs and began to move towards Rainbow. The athlete got the hint and pulled her boy boxers off. She then pulled her legs apart as well and moved near Fluttershy's glistening love button. The two began to cross their legs in a particular manner, until they could feel themselves upon each other. Rainbow gulped as her own place began to throb as it felt the heat of Fluttershy's. Fluttershy reassuringly smiled at Rainbow, and with a returning smile from her, Fluttershy thrusted into Rainbow. The two began to slide against each other's sensitive area, and they immediately began to cry out with pleasure. Their wetness rubbed against each other, and they could feel themselves dripping over the bed. Everything felt so wonderful. Everything felt like it was so new. Rainbow had never felt anything this intense before, and she was so happy that she got to spend this wonder 3-year anniversary with the love of her life like this. Nothing in this world was better than this. Shoo! It's really dark, Scootaloo! Applebloom looked over to her friend next to her as they walked away from Sugar Cube Corner. We couldn't help that Pinkie told us so many stories. But you're right, it's super dark and super scary. Scootaloo looked up to the dark sky. The goddess's moon was shining, but it was still too dim of a light to make it less scary. I don't know if we should go to Sweet Apple Acres. There are too many woods, and what if something tries to get us? Applebloom shivered at the very thought of something from the scary, ever-free forest coming after them. Yeah, Maybe we should just head back home to my place for the night. We can call Applejack when we get there to let her know where we're at. Scootaloo began to wheel herself in the cottage's direction. She could hear Apple Bloom's footsteps following her. Yeah, we should. Apple Bloom caught up to Scootaloo, and they began walking side by side back to Fluttershy's home. I think I can finally see it! Yeah, I can see the lights are still on! Scootaloo pointed a finger up towards the cottage ahead of them. Yep, I see it too! Finally! Apple Bloom let out a long sigh of relief as they finally got to their destination safely. Let's hurry up now. It's starting to get cold. Scootaloo began to wheel herself quickly up to the doorstep. She let Apple Bloom open it up for her and help her inside. Hello? Scootaloo called out upon entering. She heard no reply. Maybe they are asleep. Apple Bloom looked over to her friend and shrugged slightly. Probably. Scootaloo smiled. The phone is upstairs in Mom's room. We can go get it and call Applejack, okay? Scootaloo wheeled herself over to the staircase and then stared back at Apple Bloom, who sighed as she saw that they would have to carry Scootaloo up the whole entire staircase. Alright. Apple Bloom got behind Scootaloo and grabbed onto her chair. She began to pull as hard as she could. A few more struggling moments later, Apple Bloom finally made it up to the second floor with Scootaloo. The pink-haired girl smiled at her tired friend as she began to make her way down the hallway. Apple Bloom finally caught her breath and then followed after Scootaloo, who was heading for Fluttershy's room. She suddenly stopped at a strange noise coming from Fluttershy's room. She put off a confused look and then turned her head to Apple Bloom as if she had the answers. Apple Bloom merely shrugged and walked behind Scootaloo as she approached the door. She pulled her hand over the doorknob and then pushed it open. She felt like her jaw almost hit the floor as she watched naked Fluttershy kissing naked Rainbow Dash in a strange place. Mom? Scootaloo was taken aback by what she was witnessing. Her heart pounded oddly against her chest as she stared blankly at Rainbow and Fluttershy. Scoots! Oh, fuck. Rainbow growled under her breath as she turned away from this innocent child. She placed her hand over her face and let her eyes look over Fluttershy. Oh, my. Scootaloo felt Apple Bloom reach out for her hand. With her fingers intertwined with her comforting friend, she turned on her wheels and jolted out of the room as quickly as possible, dragging little Apple Bloom along with her. Scootaloo wheeled to the stairs, and without thinking, wheeled down them. Apple Bloom let go of her hand in time not to be dragged down the stairs in a very uncomfortable position. Fortunately enough, Scootaloo landed down the stairs without toppling over. Apple Bloom ran after her without a word to say. She couldn't even believe what had just seen. Let alone, could she start to understand how it affected Scootaloo, who knew those two as her mothers. Scootaloo raced out the door and kept on going without looking back. She could no longer hear Apple Bloom's footsteps either. She had been going much too fast for her to keep up, but that was perfectly fine. She didn't want to have to face Apple Bloom, or anyone with this. What had she just seen anyways? Were her mothers really gay? She never expected them to be in love with each other. She always thought they were just friends, just roommates, just childhood buddies. How could she have not seen that they were lovers? Did anyone else know? Or were they keeping it a secret from everyone? Or was it just Scootaloo that they didn't want to tell? Either way, Scootaloo still didn't want to think as she continued to race as quickly as she could away from the cottage and away from her thoughts. But as she kept on going, she came to an abrupt stop. Her wheelchair hit something hard, and it sent her falling forward. Scootaloo rubbed her face as she pushed herself up from the ground. Her body still was sore from her previous falling accident, and she could feel those effects surging through her body once again. But as she looked up in front of her, she saw what had stopped her from going on. Scootaloo tried to pick herself up as she let her hands fall onto a large wooden box.